What if I told you this story started with a phone call for a pizza and ended with a man's death by an explosive strapped around his neck, live on television, in one of the most bizarre and haunting true crime events in recent American history? What if I told you this wasn't a movie, or fiction, or something dreamed up by Hollywood, but a real-life sequence of events so twisted, so grimly ingenious, and so shockingly calculated that even FBI agents called it one of the most complicated and bizarre crimes they had ever investigated? This is the story of the pizza bomber, the collar bomb case from Erie, Pennsylvania, and this is the story of Brian Wells. Wikipedia: it was August 28, 2003, an ordinary late summer afternoon in Erie, Pennsylvania, when a pizza shop called Mamma Mia's Pizzeria received a strange order. A payphone at a nearby gas station rang, and the voice on the line was garbled, barely intelligible. The owner didn't catch it, so he passed the phone to one of his delivery drivers, 46-year-old Brian Douglas Wells, a man known around town as friendly, hard-working, steady. For 10 years, Brian had delivered pizzas for a living, navigating the streets of Erie day after day without drama. Then came that call. Case File True Crime Podcast. Brian was told to deliver 2 pizzas to an address at the end of a dirt road, an odd location, not a home, not typical at all. It was the site of a television transmitting tower, far from the usual residential delivery. Something about that call didn't add up, but Brian, like any loyal employee, went. He drove down that road in his Geo Metro, unaware that this ordinary errand was about to destroy his life. Case File True Crime Podcast. When Brian reached the lonely clearing near the tower, men were waiting for him. What happened next is still debated. There are conflicting testimonies, inconsistent police reports, and endless questions. But what investigators pieced together was this: Brian was forced or coerced into wearing a heavy collar bomb, a homemade explosive device locked around his neck like a twisted necklace. This was no fake prop, it was real. The bomb was crafted with multiple timers, pipes, and decoy wires. Some experts later said it looked more sophisticated than a typical homemade device. Sofrup, the men handed Brian a letter, a set of chilling instructions. He was to go to a PNC bank in the Summit Town Center, walk in with the bomb on his neck and a shotgun disguised like a cane in his hand, and tell the teller to give him $250,000. Then he was to follow additional clues, a deadly scavenger hunt that would eventually lead him to ways to disarm the bomb. If he failed, the device would explode. Pizza bomber. But here's where this case gets unimaginably grim. Brian didn't run, he didn't scream, and he didn't panic the way someone under immediate threat usually would. Instead, CCTV footage later showed him walk calmly into the bank, even sucking on a lollipop, like a man on an errand rather than someone in mortal terror. He handed a bank teller a note that demanded the money with specific instructions: gather employees with access codes to vault and work fast. You have only 15 minutes. The teller obeyed, but explained she couldn't open the vault. Instead, she gave him whatever cash was available, $8,702. It was a fraction of the demanded amount. Wired Brian walked back out, cash in hand, and drove off. But he didn't get far. Within about 50 minutes, state troopers spotted him, pulled him over, and took him into custody, still with the bomb locked to his neck. Brian told the officers the truth as he saw it. He claimed a group of men had forced him into this. "It's gonna go off. I'm not lying," he shouted, begging for them to believe him. Wired police backed away, cleared the area, and called in the bomb squad. Cameras from local news stations began to gather. The surreal scene was unfolding live on television. For 25 minutes, Brian sat on the ground, cuffed, the device ticking, 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 and then, just 3 minutes before the bomb squad arrived, the collar bomb detonated. Brian Wells was killed instantly, blown backwards onto the pavement with a fatal wound to his chest. Wired. What made this case even more twisted was what the investigation uncovered next. Inside Brian's car, investigators found handwritten notes that outlined a series of clues, as if he was supposed to be sent on a kind of deadly scavenger hunt before reaching safety. But when authorities traveled the route, they realized something chilling. Even if Brian had completed every stop perfectly and immediately, it was physically impossible to finish the tasks in the allotted time before the bomb was set to explode. It was a no-win trap. The Daily Wire police initially weren't sure if Brian was innocent, a co-conspirator, or something in between, because some evidence hinted he might have known more than he claimed. Some witnesses even said Brian had discussed the robbery plan with people a month before the incident. Yet his family and close friends insisted he was innocent, a man who was set up, tricked into coming to that site, handed the device without understanding what was about to happen, and then killed. Wikipedia +1. In the months and years that followed, the FBI, the ATF, and state police dug deeper. They focused on a group of individuals connected by drugs, money troubles, and twisted motives, among them Marjorie Diehl Armstrong and Kenneth Barnes. Diehl Armstrong was an intelligent but mentally troubled woman with a history of violence and murder. Barnes was entangled with her in schemes that included plans for murder and inheritance, and it was believed the robbery plot was meant to pay someone to kill her father for that inheritance. Newstrack English information continued to unravel into one of the most complex criminal puzzles ever seen. A bomb that wasn't just meant to force a robbery, but possibly intended to kill someone and make it look like an accident. A series of fake clues, conflicting testimonies, betrayals, and long-buried bodies discovered during the investigation. Researchers and filmmakers later called this a labyrinth of lies, greed, and deception that shook not just Erie, but crime investigators across the nation. The investigation quickly moved beyond Erie's quiet streets and into the dark lives of the people behind the scheme. Authorities soon uncovered that this was not a random robbery gone wrong. Every element had been meticulously planned by Marjorie Diehl Armstrong, a woman whose life was a tangle of mental illness, obsession with wealth, and a history of violence that few in her neighborhood could have imagined. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and exhibited signs of manipulative, calculated behavior, often weaving stories to manipulate those around her. She, along with Kenneth Barnes, her boyfriend and co-conspirator, had devised a plan that combined a deadly collar bomb, a bank robbery, and a twisted scavenger hunt, all designed to make Brian Wells the unwitting victim and fall guy. What investigators found next was almost surreal. Barnes and Diehl Armstrong had meticulously planned every step of Brian's movements, calculating distances, timing, and the likely response of law enforcement. The collar bomb itself was a masterpiece of horror and engineering, far more complex than most homemade devices, packed with shrapnel, a triggering mechanism that could not easily be disarmed by anyone who wasn't intimately familiar with its construction, and hidden failsafes to ensure the victim would not survive long enough to provide the authorities with answers. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a psychological torture device. Interviews with friends and family painted a portrait of Brian Wells as a man who loved routine and never sought trouble. He was a devoted father, quiet and dependable, a man who had recently been coping with the death of a loved one. Nothing in his past suggested he would ever be drawn into a criminal scheme, let alone one that ended in a live, televised execution-style murder. But the killer's meticulous planning ensured that he had no choice, no way to escape the device, no possibility of bargaining, and no chance to survive once the chain of events had begun. Evidence began surfacing of deadly duplicity. Diehl Armstrong had prior involvement in violent plots, including earlier schemes involving insurance fraud, attempted murder, and manipulations that left others dead or ruined. Barnes, too, had a criminal record and a demonstrated willingness to use violence to achieve financial gain. Together, they orchestrated the pizza delivery call as a ruse to lure Brian to the remote location. He was essentially a pawn in a deadly game of chess, and the stakes were real, his life. Perhaps the most shocking detail, rarely reported in mainstream coverage, was the discovery of hidden notes and maps in the Diehl Armstrong residence. These documents outline the entire plot in cold, clinical detail, the sequence of events, expected outcomes, and contingency plans if anyone went off script. Investigators later concluded that this level of planning indicated the conspirators were not merely trying to rob a bank. Their goal was control, deception, and absolute execution of a plan with lethal precision, using Brian as the instrument of their scheme without ever intending for him to live to see the end. Then came the trial. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong's demeanor in court fascinated and horrified the public. She presented a facade of normalcy, while prosecutors detailed her role in manipulating Brian, assembling the device, and coordinating every step with Barnes. Evidence included bomb schematics, witness statements, phone records, and her own writings, enough to demonstrate her direct involvement in planning, creating, and supervising the events leading to Brian's death. The jury was confronted with not just a story of murder, but one of psychological manipulation, greed, and cold, calculated malevolence. During the trial, experts testified about the bomb itself, describing its unique mechanisms that made it both terrifying and nearly impossible to dismantle. It had multiple layers of triggers, a primary timer that could not be easily cut or overridden, and secondary failsafes that ensured detonation if tampered with. Forensic analysis later revealed that even the placement of shrapnel inside the device was calculated to maximize injury and guarantee a fatal outcome. The intention wasn't just to scare Brian, it was to ensure that the scavenger hunt he was forced to follow would end in death unless he acted under the exact conditions dictated by the conspirators. As the media coverage expanded, the story captured the nation's attention. Live footage of police officers cautiously approaching Brian with the device strapped to his neck, and the moments immediately preceding the explosion, became haunting images replayed across news broadcasts. Psychologists and criminologists debated the case endlessly. Was Brian complicit in any way? Could he have survived if he had acted differently? But the most unsettling conclusion remained. Brian Wells was a victim of a perfectly orchestrated murder disguised as a robbery, executed by individuals whose obsession with money and control eclipsed any sense of morality. Once the investigation moved deeper, authorities uncovered the full extent of Marjorie Deal Armstrong's manipulations. She wasn't just involved in planning the robbery, she had psychologically groomed her co-conspirators, exploiting their weaknesses, obsessions, and debts to bend them to her will. Kenneth Barnes, initially reluctant, became entangled in her web because of his financial desperation and personal loyalty to her. But it wasn't just greed or survival. Investigators later concluded that Marjorie enjoyed control. The way she orchestrated events, manipulated Brian Wells, and designed the bomb to be inescapable indicated a cold, calculating mind obsessed with power over life and death. One of the most chilling discoveries was how the conspirators created multiple layers of misdirection. Phone records, letters, and maps showed that Brian was never supposed to survive. Even if he had followed every instruction perfectly, there were impossible deadlines built into the scavenger hunt. At one point, the FBI recreated the timeline, measuring distances, walking paths, and estimated travel speeds, and the results were terrifying. There was no conceivable way for Brian to reach safety once the bomb was locked on him. It was a trap. And yet, Brian acted with remarkable composure, performing exactly as the conspirators predicted. Some law enforcement officers later described it as watching a man walk through a real-life death game. As forensic teams dissected the bomb after the explosion, they realized that it was unlike anything seen in most criminal cases. The device used commercial blasting caps and layered shrapnel, intended not only to kill, but to create a chaotic, horrific scene. Investigators believed that Marjorie and Barnes were inspired by movies or stories of explosive devices, but this was reality, not fiction. Even seasoned bomb technicians admitted the device was complex enough to rival some military-grade explosives in terms of its unpredictability and lethality. Then came the uncovering of hidden evidence in Marjorie's home: journals, scribbled notes, and diagrams that detailed not just Brian's role, but potential escape routes, alternative plans, and contingency measures if law enforcement interfered. She had essentially scripted a crime like a deadly play, and Brian Wells was the lead actor forced onto the stage without a choice. Investigators found additional letters addressed to unknown accomplices, suggesting that the plot may have involved more individuals than initially believed, people who remained anonymous or unidentified. This meant that the true scope of the conspiracy was even larger and darker than public records ever revealed. The legal proceedings were equally shocking. Marjorie Deal Armstrong's demeanor in court was disturbingly calm. She often smiled or laughed, while prosecutors detailed the fatal consequences of her scheme. Her attorneys argued that she had not physically placed the bomb on Brian, and indeed, she claimed she never touched him, but prosecutors painted a different picture. They argued convincingly that her psychological manipulation was the core mechanism that made the crime possible. Without her scheming, without her planning, the bomb would never have ended up on Brian's neck, and he would still be alive. The jury had to reconcile a woman who seemed normal in public with the architect of a horrifying death. Kenneth Barnes' role also drew intense scrutiny. Initially seen as a peripheral player, he was eventually convicted for assisting in the construction of the bomb, planning the robbery, and conspiring to commit murder. The investigation revealed disturbing conversations between him and Marjorie, including instructions on how to recruit Brian, how to time the bank robbery, and how to ensure Brian could not escape. Witnesses later reported that Barnes had even expressed hesitation at some points, but Marjorie's relentless influence pushed him forward. The chilling dynamic between these two, a manipulative mastermind and a complicit accomplice, defined the entire case. Beyond the courtroom drama, there were unseen details that shocked investigators. For example, hidden in the debris after the explosion, experts discovered tiny components of the bomb that indicated pre-testing and rehearsal, meaning the conspirators had likely constructed and tested variations of the device before using it on Brian. This implied a level of premeditation and planning far beyond a simple robbery, turning what looked like a bizarre crime into a meticulously executed murder plot. And yet, the psychological impact of the crime extended far beyond Erie, Pennsylvania. Local residents reported feeling a constant unease, afraid to pick up a pizza for months, while the media coverage made it national news almost overnight. News anchors replayed images of Brian's calm demeanor as he approached the bank, the notes he carried, and the moments leading up to the explosion. For the American public, the story became a horrifying spectacle, a man trapped in a mechanical, deadly puzzle created by other humans. As the trial progressed, prosecutors revealed just how manipulative and cold-blooded Marjorie Diehl Armstrong truly was. They presented evidence showing she had planned Brian Wells' movements down to the minute, ensuring that the bomb would leave him no real chance to survive. One of the most disturbing revelations was that Marjorie had written letters to accomplices discussing every contingency, including the possibility of Brian trying to escape or alert authorities. These letters, hidden in various locations, demonstrated her chilling foresight. She anticipated every move, every decision, and designed the entire event to maximize chaos and ensure her plan succeeded without detection. Experts testified about the bomb itself in painstaking detail, describing its multi-layered design, hidden triggers, and shrapnel placement. Every component indicated deliberate malice, not just improvisation. It wasn't just about killing Brian, it was about creating terror, asserting control, and leaving a mark that would haunt the authorities and the public. Investigators discovered that the device had been tested in isolated locations prior to the actual event, suggesting a horrifying amount of planning and rehearsal. Even seasoned bomb technicians said the device's complexity was beyond anything seen in most criminal cases, indicating premeditation at the highest level. During court proceedings, details about Kenneth Barnes' involvement came to light. While Marjorie was the mastermind, Barnes had assisted in bomb construction, planned the bank robbery, and helped coordinate logistics. Witness testimony indicated that he had even scouted the bank with Marjorie beforehand, memorized security protocols, and helped determine Brian's route for the scavenger hunt. What became clear was that Brian Wells was never intended to succeed. He was always a disposable pawn in a larger scheme driven by greed, manipulation, and perverse control. The trial also exposed disturbing psychological aspects. Marjorie's mental state, including her bipolar disorder and long history of manipulative behavior, became a focal point. Experts testified that her combination of intelligence, charisma, and psychopathy allowed her to coerce others into deadly actions without them fully understanding the consequences. She could make accomplices believe that their actions were rational, necessary, or even their own ideas. In other words, she was a master manipulator, capable of orchestrating a death from behind the scenes. One of the lesser-known details that emerged was the existence of alternative plots and correspondence, suggesting that Brian might have been forced into other dangerous situations even before the pizza delivery. Investigators found old letters, bank receipts, and coded notes linking Marjorie to previous schemes of fraud, violence, and coercion, many of which had gone unnoticed or unprosecuted. It was almost as if Brian's fate was the culmination of a pattern of orchestrated manipulation and violence, not a single isolated event. As the case drew national attention, the public struggled to comprehend the horror. Here was a man walking calmly into a bank with a bomb on his neck, performing a task as if it were routine, while death literally ticked with each second. And behind him, orchestrating every detail, was a woman whose ambition and lack of empathy were frighteningly precise. The narrative captivated media outlets, true crime enthusiasts, and investigators alike, forcing many to reconsider the boundaries between criminal ingenuity and human depravity. Finally, the legal system delivered its verdicts. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong was convicted of conspiracy and murder, though her complex mental health history influenced the proceedings and sentencing. Kenneth Barnes received a substantial prison sentence for his role as an accomplice and co-conspirator. Yet the case left lingering questions. Were there others involved who escaped justice? Were there clues about prior schemes that could have prevented Brian's death? Could the FBI or local law enforcement have acted differently to save him? For many, the answers remain unclear, leaving the case shrouded in mystery and debate even years later. Even today, criminologists, psychologists, and true crime aficionados dissect this case, analyzing the layers of manipulation, the intricate bomb design, and the human behavior under extreme coercion. Brian Wells is remembered not just as a victim of a bizarre crime, but as a man caught in a perfect storm of greed, deception, and lethal intelligence, a story that serves as both a cautionary tale and a haunting reminder of the depths of human malice. Even after the convictions, investigators kept digging and uncovered shocking unseen details that had never made it into mainstream reports. For one, the bomb itself had hidden serial numbers and materials that suggested it may have been sourced from multiple locations, some legal, some underground. The conspirators had assembled it like a puzzle, using components purchased over months, deliberately avoiding patterns that might raise suspicion, and leaving no paper trail directly linking them to the device. It wasn't just a homemade bomb, it was calculated, professional, and terrifyingly clever. Another layer of secrecy emerged when authorities reviewed Brian's interactions leading up to that fatal day. Phone logs, surveillance footage, and witness interviews revealed strange encounters with unknown individuals, some of whom approached him under seemingly innocent pretenses. Investigators believed these interactions may have been reconnaissance or preliminary manipulation, steps in a meticulous chain of events meant to ensure Brian would comply without resistance. The chilling realization: Brian might have been under surveillance for days, even weeks, prior to the robbery, and the conspirators had studied his behavior like chess players studying a pawn. Perhaps the most psychologically disturbing element came from the letters and notes found after Brian's death. One note, intended as part of the scavenger hunt, included instructions so detailed it was as if the conspirators were anticipating Brian's every thought and hesitation. The bomb's timers, the distances between locations, and the coded clues were all engineered to produce stress, confusion, and ultimately, fear-induced compliance. Forensic psychologists concluded that the device itself was a weapon of psychological terror, as much as it was a physical threat. The media coverage added another layer of horror. Footage of Brian's calm demeanor as he entered the bank, the notes he handed to the teller, and the moments before the bomb exploded became iconic images of terror and suspense. Viewers described a surreal sense of watching a man trapped in an unwinnable game, his life measured in ticking seconds. Analysts later noted that Brian's ability to maintain composure under such extreme duress highlighted not just his character, but the morbid precision with which the conspirators had set the stage. The investigation also revealed inconsistencies and omissions in the initial police response, sparking debate among experts. Could the bomb have been disarmed earlier? Were there miscommunications that delayed specialized bomb squads? While hindsight offers clarity, the reality was that the conspirators designed the crime knowing these uncertainties would work in their favor. The device's complexity, combined with Brian's limited time and the unpredictable human response, meant that even law enforcement's best efforts might not have saved him. Finally, the broader psychological impact on the Erie community was profound. Families reported fear picking up pizza, distrust of strangers, and a lingering unease that lasted months. For some, the story of Brian Wells became a cautionary tale about obedience, manipulation, and the lethal potential of human ingenuity. True crime historians now cite the case as a study in how ordinary people can be drawn into extraordinary danger through psychological coercion and calculated planning. As the investigation delved further, the spotlight turned squarely on Marjorie Deal Armstrong, whose psychological profile stunned even seasoned FBI profilers. She was intelligent, articulate, and outwardly charming, yet behind that facade lurked a mind capable of extreme manipulation and ruthless planning. Experts described her as someone who could blend logic, strategy, and emotional control, bending others to her will with terrifying ease. Her bipolar disorder, coupled with a documented history of violent tendencies, gave her both the impulsive creativity and the cold calculation needed to execute a crime of such complexity. Investigators concluded that Brian Wells' fate was sealed not just by the bomb, but by Marjorie's ability to predict, coerce, and control the people around her. Court testimony revealed the full extent of her involvement. She had orchestrated the bank robbery, chosen Brian as the unwitting participant, and even planned contingencies to ensure the bomb would function exactly as intended. Witnesses testified that she had instructed accomplices to carefully time every step, monitor Brian, and prepare for law enforcement intervention, demonstrating a level of foresight that was chilling. The letters found in her home contained coded language, notes on distances and travel times, and instructions for accomplices that detailed exactly how the plan should unfold, almost like a military operation disguised as a robbery. The investigation also uncovered hidden co-conspirators, whose names initially never reached the public. Some were involved in assembling the bomb, others in recruiting Brian or scouting the bank and surrounding areas. These individuals, according to investigators, had been carefully insulated from direct contact with Brian, leaving him completely unaware of the depth of the conspiracy. This layered approach ensured that if anyone was caught or questioned, the trail of culpability would be nearly impossible to trace back to the mastermind, Diehl Armstrong. As the trial progressed, Kenneth Barnes' testimony added shocking details. He described how Marjorie had mentally dominated him, convincing him that the plan was necessary and that Brian's compliance was guaranteed. Yet internal communications and phone records indicated that even Barnes had moments of doubt and hesitation, which Marjorie swiftly neutralized through manipulation and intimidation. The jury saw a chilling dynamic, a brilliant, manipulative mind orchestrating chaos, while a co-conspirator executed the technical details, leaving an innocent man trapped in the middle. Forensic analysis of the bomb reinforced the nightmarish reality. Each piece of the device was meticulously constructed. Timers, shrapnel placement, and triggering mechanisms were arranged to maximize lethality. Some pieces had been pre-tested to ensure functionality, while others were designed to mislead anyone attempting to disarm the device. Experts later testified that the bomb's sophistication went far beyond what most criminals are capable of, confirming that Brian Wells had been placed in a situation with virtually no chance of survival. Perhaps the most haunting revelation came from previously unseen surveillance and witness interviews. Investigators pieced together Brian's route in those final moments, revealing that every turn, every step, and every encounter was anticipated by the conspirators. From the pizza shop to the remote tower, from the bank to the moment police arrived, the plan had been designed with such precision that Brian's behavior, calm, methodical, and even polite, was exactly what the conspirators expected. It was as if he was walking through a deadly choreography, dictated by the twisted genius of Marjorie Diehl Armstrong. Even after Diehl Armstrong's conviction, questions lingered. Were there others who escaped prosecution? Had investigators uncovered all accomplices? Was there more evidence buried in private papers, coded letters, or hidden caches? True crime experts continue to debate these questions, suggesting that the full scope of the conspiracy may never be completely known. As the courtroom drama unfolded, the evidence against Marjorie Diehl Armstrong became impossible to ignore. Prosecutors presented a meticulously detailed timeline of the events leading up to Brian Wells' death. From the initial planning stages, the recruitment of accomplices, the construction of the bomb, to the fateful day when Brian unknowingly became the centerpiece of a deadly plot. The jury heard testimony from bomb experts, forensic psychologists, and law enforcement officers, each piece of evidence painting a portrait of a woman who combined intelligence, manipulation, and utter disregard for human life. Diehl Armstrong's demeanor in court was unnerving. At times, she appeared calm, even smiling when prosecutors recounted the fatal consequences of her plan. She claimed she had never directly handled the bomb, nor intended for Brian to die, but the letters, notes, and phone records told a different story. They revealed her orchestration of every step, including timing the bomb, instructing accomplices, and anticipating police involvement. For many observers, the disconnect between her calm exterior and the deadly events she engineered was chilling. She had effectively created a real-life puppet show where Brian Wells was the unwilling actor. Kenneth Barnes' testimony further exposed the twisted collaboration. While initially appearing less culpable, his involvement in assembling the bomb, scouting locations, and coordinating with Diehl Armstrong was undeniable. Yet, the court also explored how Marjorie's psychological control over him had been absolute, demonstrating the terrifying power of mental manipulation combined with criminal intent. Witnesses described her convincing Barnes that every decision, no matter how deadly, was necessary, making him a willing accomplice to murder without fully understanding the consequences. After months of testimony and deliberation, the verdicts were handed down. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong was convicted of murder, conspiracy, and related charges, ultimately receiving a life sentence. Kenneth Barnes received a lengthy prison term for his direct role in the crime. Yet even with justice served in court, the psychological impact of the case rippled far beyond Erie, Pennsylvania. Families, neighbors, and even casual observers of the media coverage reported lasting unease. a recognition that ordinary people can be drawn into extraordinary, lethal situations through manipulation and coercion. Uncovered letters and notes suggested that the full conspiracy might have extended even further, with accomplices who were never identified or prosecuted. Investigators acknowledged that parts of the case would remain shrouded in mystery, including how much Brian Wells understood before the pizza delivery, whether he had been surveilled for days or weeks prior, and the complete network of co-conspirators involved in the deadly plot. For many criminologists, this case became a textbook example of layered manipulation, criminal ingenuity, and the deadly intersection of psychology and planning. Brian Wells' story remains haunting. He was a man who had lived a quiet, ordinary life, a father, a friend, a pizza delivery driver, thrust into a situation orchestrated by individuals whose intelligence and malice combined in lethal ways. The case highlights the terrifying reality that sometimes the most dangerous threats are not the people who confront us directly, but the ones who manipulate events from behind the scenes. The world watched as a life was snuffed out in minutes, a chilling reminder of human vulnerability and the dark potential of premeditated crime. Even today, documentaries, books, and true crime podcasts revisit the pizza bomber case, exploring its psychological, forensic, and criminal aspects. Analysts dissect the bomb's construction, the conspirators' planning, and Brian Wells' actions in the final moments, seeking to understand how ordinary people can become unwitting participants in extraordinary crimes. The story lingers in the public imagination, not just for its shocking details, but for the profound questions it raises about morality, manipulation, and human behavior under extreme duress. As investigators combed through the aftermath, they discovered hidden pieces of the puzzle that had initially been overlooked. Small fragments of handwritten notes, buried in corners of Marjorie Deal Armstrong's home, revealed instructions for accomplices that were never carried out, almost like backup plans or alternate scenarios designed in case Brian deviated from the path. These included coded directions, maps of remote areas in Erie, and even sketches of the bank layout and surrounding streets. Experts analyzing these documents realized that the conspiracy had been far more extensive than anyone realized, possibly involving people who never came forward, and suggesting that Brian Wells was just one part of a larger, sinister scheme. Investigators also uncovered phone calls and messages between Marjorie, Barnes, and other unidentified associates. Some of these communications hinted at prior test runs or rehearsals of the bomb scenario, raising the terrifying possibility that the conspirators had deliberately practiced the logistics of trapping someone in a collar bomb. It became clear that this was not an impulsive crime. It was a meticulously calculated plan, combining psychological manipulation, mechanical ingenuity, and extreme foresight. New forensic analysis of the bomb fragments revealed unexpected modifications. Tiny components had been adjusted in ways that suggested a designer who anticipated police intervention, human error, or even attempts to tamper with the device. Every detail, from wire placement to timer calibration, seemed intentionally designed to maximize terror and ensure fatality. Some experts later speculated that the conspirators had studied real-life bomb cases to enhance their design, indicating a level of criminal ingenuity and obsession rarely seen in domestic crimes. Hidden evidence also highlighted the deliberate complexity of Brian's instructions. The scavenger hunt-like sequence he was forced to follow was full of contradictory clues, impossible deadlines, and tasks that could not physically be completed in time. The authorities concluded that the plot was designed so that Brian's failure was inevitable, making his death a predictable outcome from the very start. Yet despite this, Brian exhibited incredible composure, following the steps with remarkable calm, a haunting demonstration of human resilience in the face of almost certain death. The media, of course, seized on the case, broadcasting images and footage that are now etched into public memory. The live coverage of Brian being stopped by police, the tense standoff, and the moments leading up to the explosion created a surreal spectacle that gripped the nation. But behind the public eye, law enforcement continued to dig, piecing together the layers of deceit and manipulation that had led to this tragedy. The case became a study not just in criminal methodology, but in the psychology of coercion, obedience, and manipulation under extreme threat. Even years later, researchers examining the pizza bomber case uncover details that remain unsettling. From previously unseen correspondence between Marjorie and her co-conspirators, to the intricate construction of the bomb and the unrealized backup plans, each revelation adds a new layer of dark ingenuity and calculated cruelty. The story doesn't just tell of a single death. it reveals a network of manipulations and a masterful orchestration of terror that few could have imagined. And while the courtroom proceedings delivered justice for Brian Wells, the lingering questions continue to haunt the public and investigators alike. Were there other accomplices still unidentified? Could law enforcement have acted differently? How many people were aware of the plan before it unfolded? These unanswered questions ensure that the pizza bomber case remains one of the most perplexing, chilling, and fascinating true crime stories in American history. As the dust settled on the case, the legacy of the pizza bomber tragedy extended far beyond Erie, Pennsylvania. Brian Wells became a symbol of the terrifying intersection between human manipulation and mechanical ingenuity, a man caught in a perfect storm engineered by others. Criminologists and psychologists dissected the case for years, examining not just the bomb and the crime, but the complex interplay of control, coercion, and obedience that had led an ordinary man to his death. Brian's calm, almost stoic behavior during his final moments became a subject of study, a demonstration of how human psychology can remain composed even under the most extreme life-threatening circumstances. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong remained in prison until her death, her life a study in criminal brilliance and moral corruption. She left behind a legacy of manipulation, intricate criminal plotting, and a chilling reminder of what can happen when intelligence and ruthlessness combine without conscience. Kenneth Barnes served his sentence and faced public scrutiny for his role, yet even with convictions, the case left lingering questions about the full scope of the conspiracy, including whether others were involved or if more hidden plans had been left undiscovered. For the town of Erie and for viewers across the country, the story became a cautionary tale. It illustrated how seemingly ordinary situations, a pizza delivery, a phone call, a routine errand, could spiral into a deadly nightmare when confronted with meticulous planning, psychological manipulation, and human greed. Families who once thought life was safe and predictable learned that even everyday routines could be exploited by those willing to bend morality to achieve their ends. The case also inspired a new era of true crime analysis and media coverage, with documentaries, podcasts, and books exploring the events from multiple angles. The technical construction of the bomb, the psychological control exerted by Diehl Armstrong, the legal proceedings, and the unsolved mysteries surrounding accomplices and hidden plans. Each retelling emphasized the human element at the center of the horror, reminding audiences that Brian Wells was not just a statistic. He was a real person whose life was stolen in a meticulously orchestrated crime. Even decades later, investigators, journalists, and criminologists returned to the case to uncover new insights. Previously unseen notes, diagrams, and witness testimonies continue to surface, offering glimpses into the mind of a criminal mastermind and the tragic path of an unsuspecting victim. The pizza bomber case remains a benchmark in criminal studies, illustrating the extremes of human manipulation, greed, and cruelty, and the lasting psychological impact such crimes can have on communities and society at large. And as we remember Brian Wells, we are reminded that true crime is not just about the mechanics of murder or the thrill of investigation. It's about understanding the human psyche, the consequences of manipulation, and the fragile nature of life when confronted with calculated evil. The story of the pizza bomber stands as one of the most haunting reminders that reality can be far stranger, more terrifying, and more meticulously crafted than fiction. So if this story gripped you, if the chilling details, the hidden conspiracies, and the psychological layers kept you on edge, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into real-life crimes. Hit the like button if you want to see more content like this, and check out the rest of our videos where we explore unsolved mysteries, shocking crimes, and the human stories behind them. Every story has a lesson, every case leaves questions, and we bring you as close as possible to the truth, the dark, the twisted, and the unforgettable.